Begin by recording the event. Thanks everybody for joining the Just Transition Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council on October 7th. I want to check in, if you're just joining us, please check in on and introduce yourself in the chat. And we are asking people to share a gratitude that they are feeling and bring that to our circle. And I wanted to just make sure, were there any changes or additions to this agenda as I just walked through it? Okay, and I wanted to check in on the minutes from our last meeting of September the 23rd. They are linked in the agenda that you received. And I always want to especially thank Amanda for taking those minutes. She never gets appreciated. Any questions, concerns, thoughts? Hearing nothing, we will accept them as approved. And amazing, we are ready to move forward with sort of the public part of our forum or our meeting today. I didn't know whether I know it was your motivation that helped us convene today. Did you want to say anything to kind of introduce what you're hoping to hear?
I didn't have anything specifically. I just thought that it was important that we're hearing from campaigns like this. And I know there is other work happening to bring voice of people that we're not necessarily reaching in our process. So making sure we make space for that.
Yeah, and I guess setting in context, you know, the Climate Council has engaged the work of RISE Consulting and Climate Access, and they are doing a tremendous a convening or set of convenings, and I think it might actually be good to just hear even a slice of what you're accomplishing and where you are in that process. But within that process, we wanted to make sure that voices who aren't normally at these tables also have an opportunity to be heard. So I really appreciate Iris. And I know 350.org has done tremendous outreach to get new voices in that table. So I think that's a big tenor of what we'll hopefully hear about. And I know that there are other efforts as well to hear about. Meredith, would you mind just starting off to give us a super high level, how's it going?
Yeah, we've had 6 public events so far. 4 of them were in person around the state, and then we had 2 online events. The last one was yesterday, and then we're having 1 more online event specifically for individuals who identify as being part of BIPOC communities, and that will be next week. And it's been really terrific to hear from the public. We've walked through and heard, asked folks about their concerns about climate change, specifically in their local communities, about how climate change may have already personally impacted them. And then we've walked through the big action areas that were developed by the subcommittees. We took all of that really great technical information and we tried to translate it in a way that was publicly accessible. And I can put a link to those documents in the chat in a second too, just so everyone sees those handouts that we've shared at the public events. We had an overview document that we put together, and then also a handout that walks through those different action areas. So we're taking all of that information as well as looking through a survey that we have out right now that's open. I can also put that link in the chat if folks want to share that with their networks. That'd be terrific. That's another channel or kind of conduit for capturing public opinion that we're including as well. So taking all of those great, all that great input that we heard from the in-person events. The in-person events, we captured that feedback on a bunch of flip charts. So we're typing up all of that information. And then in the online events, we had some really terrific input and some Google Docs that everyone was collaborating on together. So just seeing that folks really are passionate about these issues, they really care deeply. And it's just terrific to see that level of engagement.
Good. Beverly, did you want to ask a question or say something?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I wanted to know, when is online for BIPOC people next week?
It'll be next Tuesday, I believe. That did have to be rescheduled. There were unfortunately concerns about Zoom security right on the day. There was some flags raised with that event, and so we had to shift gears and make that more of an invite, or just figure out a way that we could secure people's Zoom links for that event, unfortunately. So that will be next Tuesday, and I can send out the information on that, or you can get in touch with me after. I'll put my email in and I can get a way to connect with that BIPOC meeting, but we had to be a little more careful with how we were sharing that information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from our subcommittee members and staff? Any other questions for Meredith at this point? I mean, go ahead, somebody.
Sorry, it's me.
Kashka?
Hi, guys. I'm going to turn off my camera just because of my internet connection. Hi, Meredith. So I was just wondering, how was the, I guess, the attendance, and what did you find as far as like attendance from, was it all over the Vermont? How were the areas, the regionality of it? And just a few questions regarding that.
Yeah, I wasn't at the in-person one, so I'd have to go back and look at the specific numbers for those regions. I believe there was about, I want to say maybe averaging around 40 people at each of those events. Is that right? Marion was maybe more.
Yeah, ranging between, 30 to 50, depending on the event.
Which is actually right in the range that we had hoped for. That was right in our goal range. So that was terrific. And then the online events have been popular. We had, I'm trying to think, around 130, maybe 120 people on the first online event. And we had 105 last night on the second online event. So I would say those were well attended.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I have another question just in terms of understanding who we're hearing from. Are we getting any kind of demographic information? We may have addresses or something just to have a sense of how, we're obviously, it's wonderful and so important to be having a BIPOC specific event. Of course, our group is focused on the voices of BIPOC and other historically marginalized groups. And so we're just trying to have a sense of what you're hearing as we begin the voices we're hearing from today.
Yeah, we haven't captured demographics in any quantitative way. We're asking folks for their name, email, and then zip codes. We had some geographic data there. Just anecdotally, I would say from the online meetings that they were, I'd say maybe, I don't know that I can speak specifically to, comfortably to how, to those demographics without people self-identifying. But I would say that probably it was a primarily white audience, at least from just my impression. But we didn't quantitatively capture that data.
Thanks. Abby, are you wanted to chime in?
I did, thank you. Meredith, I had a question about the rescheduled BIPOC community meeting. So individuals that may have tried to sign on for the kind of originally scheduled time, would they have received any sort of a notice that it has been rescheduled to know to sign up next Tuesday?
Yeah, Jane has reached out to all those individuals who were originally registered with a separate email explaining, apologizing for having to cancel and explaining those reasons. And then with information, there's a new registration form through Zooms asking folks to make sure that they read the description clearly and understand that it is a space that is specifically designated for individuals who self-identify as being part of BIPOC communities. And so asking folks to check that box and say, yes, I have read this and I understand that that is what how this meeting is intended. So kind of having that additional layer of just a description and making sure that people are really understanding that piece before they are receive that Zoom link. So I think that will be helpful for this piece as well.
Great. I really appreciate that extra attention to detail. Thank you.
Any other kind of questions for Meredith? And I assume, Meredith, that we're actually going to hear back from you as a subcommittee at some point, in addition to your presentations, I assume, to the Climate Council, but I'm not, I just, do we have that mapped out? It might be good for us to know.
Yeah, that I don't know in terms of calendar right now. I think that's still possibly being determined, but we're going through all of the findings and the input and putting together a summary of that will be available either through presentation or a report that will be able to be viewed.
I can
I
just
have a
chime in
question.
there. Oh, go ahead, Mona. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I have a question regarding the people that you don't speak the language. So your invitation for the BIPAC community, this is you're assuming the people of color that they speak the English language. How about the other community? Because I am one of them, but I never heard of it, and except from this council, and so many they did not hear. Arab community, Nepali community, Somali, all these people also are considered people of color, but I don't think any of them know anything about it.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. That is a great point. On our on the registration form for the for all of the events, we did ask if translation would be needed at the events, and we didn't have anyone opt into that. Obviously, the registration form itself was in English, so that potentially may have been a barrier. But we were prepared to offer translation services at all of those either in-person or online events, but didn't have anyone choose that option.
One more question. So how is the people know about it? You know, like people, they don't even know about it. How is they gonna register if they don't know about it? And if the registration form is in English, they are not going to be able to read the question if you need a translation. So I am not sure how does this work.
Yeah, we did a lot of promotion through social media and also print media and through local papers. Again, those are all English sources. If there is a way that we can help you spread the word about the survey, we can look into the possibility of translating that survey into a different language. But right now, all of our promotion was primarily in English. Yeah, Marianne?
I just wanted to add, and I think Meredith, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was also outreach about the events communicated through some of the partner organizations that you did your initial audience roundtables with. And so those are, I don't have the full list in front of me, but a number of organizations that are trusted within certain communities and work within certain areas. And I know those events were publicized through those groups as well. So we did try and get the message out, but I totally hear you, Mona, on needing to be able to be upfront with the translation of those materials and the promotion of that to, again, to these communities that we're trying to reach. And then I think it was Sue's question around both presentation of the final roll-up of the public engagement information to the council. That is the expectation with Climate Access and RISE, is that they will both do a presentation to the council and will come to each of the subcommittees to share information about what was received during those public events. And I believe that's happening at the end of October, so the week of the 26th. But we'll have to double check those dates specifically. But I think that's the plan and the timeline, is to have that both go to the council and to the subcommittees sometime that week.
I also, I see you, Kashka, and I just want to make the comment to Mona that I think you're raising, the critical issue. How do we get the word out to people we want to hear from? And, I know here with us is Indra and also Kashka, that the community action agencies as a network have hired them to try to kind of beat the drum to new networks. So maybe, Indra, you could connect with Mona at some point, because it's not over. We're still in it. And maybe there's some more direct outreach we could be doing. Because I think without direct specialized outreach to groups who do not have access to the same media circles and language, most importantly, that we do, we have to look for touch points like you, Mona, to help mobilize and educate. And I think that's what's so great about having this group together. Anyway, it's my hope that we continue to be that kind of a resource for this process. Kashka, did you have something you wanted to share?
Actually, I think that you summarized it really well. Thank you, Sue. And I did want to support Mona and what she was saying as well. And if perhaps she had some ideas of the organizations or the places where we could do some outreach to those groups, because it's really challenging to know exactly how to do really beneficial outreach in a very short amount of time. So if maybe Mona, yeah, if and we do have a short amount of time on this. So if Mona,
only I will on 1 minute. There is 2 organizations that they are working with these people. Like the African Association, the Association of African Living in Vermont, called AALV. I think this is the best bet. I will send you the name of the director for this organization. He will take this survey and he will connect it to all other people who does not speak the language: Nepali, Vietnamese, Kurundi, Somali.
Thank you, Mona. That's a great next step.
thank you so much, Mona.
And that's exactly why, we've tried to raise money to bring Kashka to actually, resource people to spend time doing this, because it takes real people and real time. I want to try to make sure, are there any other questions of the subcommittee members to Meredith on how we're doing with their outreach? Great. So as we turn to hearing from folks who are joining us today to really share some voice, I'd love to just ask if you are interested in sharing some time with us, can you just raise your hand on your screen so I can kind of have a sense of how many people are thinking about commenting? I'm not really seeing any. Okay, I see Cheryl, great. I see Indra. I see Pat. I see Kashka. All right, so kind of mostly I see a handful, and maybe more will come along. Since Cheryl, you're the first hand I saw, so I welcome you to join us. Let us know who you are, a little more about you, and what you want us to hear from you. And I see Annette. Thank you.
Okay, hi. Yeah, I just turned my video on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much. I really recognize how hard you guys are all working and really excited about it. So I'm in northeastern Vermont, and I wanted to just briefly share, you can interrupt me if I'm too long, just kind of one perspective that's going on in an outlying area that, we don't hear about a lot. And it has to do with transportation specifically and equity. So when I drive around the roads, like the state roads in rural Vermont, in northeastern Vermont, you can't help but notice there's like 1 in 2 to 1 in 4 vehicles is class medium or heavy duty. And currently we funnel this heavy duty sector into our small towns and villages, which doing that maximizes emissions, right? By, going in and out and that and change of speed. But it really impacts our communities, and it's a combination of factors, like a lot of things. We built our main streets through our villages for our horses 200 years ago, and we built our homes close to the road, and they're just not suited for industrial highways and expressways for high volumes of express traffic, interstate traffic. And then the second thing would be that we withhold regulation from key rural areas. So there's really no constraint on speeds, and driving is aggressive, speeds are excessive. And the last thing would be that most of the people that are impacted are very diverse. Like in our community, there's Black people, LGBTQ, there's disabled people, there's elderly people. They're very different kinds of people, very diverse, but our leadership, on the other hand, is not diverse. I mean, our local municipalities, our elected county officials, our the government entities at the county level. And so for whatever reason, whether it's It's just leadership is isolated from frontline problems, or they're vested in other things. We just our pleas through due process have just fallen on deaf ears, for years to get engagement. So what I would like to suggest, if I could, would be 2 action addendum items that would be specific to transportation. And one would be to move all the medium and heavy duty sector traffic out of our small towns and villages. And it would address both our freight sector as well as our communities. And we've done it successfully in Vermont for more prominent areas, but just not yet with a focus on equity or vulnerability. So we have done that. I think we just need to focus on that for outlying communities and leverage everything that we have in rural Vermont. The second thing would be to implement management of operational practices, including speed management in key high-risk areas. That would be something short-term, and I think it makes sense to leverage automated enforcement in rural areas. We need accountability to be consistent, comprehensive, unbiased, and technology would give us that. Those are the 2 things that I really wanted to say. You can imagine when there's hundreds of vehicles per hour and they're accelerating to highway speeds within villages, and there's a high ratio of the high polluting vehicles and people are living 20 feet from the road, it really has an impact. So when you take away people's ability to get out of their house, to be able to just walk or to bike or garden or interact or get out and move around, it takes away resiliency. So I think it's really an important investment. It directly addresses reduction of transportation emissions and directly addresses treating people equally. Withholding regulation is pretty surprising to people coming in from outside because it wouldn't be tolerated other places. And what I'm talking about is not in more developed areas, because it's not the case everywhere. So this would just be something impacting our underserved communities. And I think it would help us in many ways. So I'll stop there, and thank you again for allowing me to share.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. It's so important to hear a rural perspective. I'm not sure that everyone is thinking about not just the quality of life, but the environmental impacts and health impacts in rural communities where heavy vehicles at high speeds are a challenge that you're talking about. And I do want to just ask a clarifying question, because you used a term I'm not sure I understood called withholding regulations. Are you saying the local's ability to change the speed limits? Is that?
No, well, that could be, but I'm saying there's no law enforcement. So really there's no speed enforcement. So there's no constraint. And if it was just the occasional, anomaly of somebody speeding, it's not worth talking about, but it's the practice. It's the common practice 24/7, thousands of industrial vehicles, hundreds of rural miles. So it's a lot of waste of fuel, plus it impacts our communities. So thanks for asking.
Yeah. Chris Campany, did you have a question or a comment from Cheryl's point?
It's more of a comment. So I used to be, I lived in Newfane Village, and I was actually chair of the village trustees. That's right on Route 30, goes right through it. And one of the things that I'm hearing and finding is that where state highways go through villages, the noise is getting so loud that the quality of life is just tanking, which is a big issue because we're trying to encourage settlement in compact areas. And if those areas are deemed to be unlivable, then that's going to be a challenge. And the way we handle it as a state with basically, the towns have the option of taking over maintenance of those roads if you do, pretty significant traffic calming measures. The plow blade width, the 15-foot plow blade width dictates a lot of state highway maintenance policy. In addition to the heavy traffic, just all kinds of traffic, we're going to have to get a better handle on how we deal with this. So I would include even, how we deal with the roads that go through our smaller communities is going to have it actually has a climate change impact, related directly to some of the policies that we're going to be considering. And the challenge with bypasses is if you take too much of the traffic away from especially areas like where you have like a village center and you have the marketplace and the bank and the hardware store and that kind of thing. My experience in other states is it basically is like moving the artery away from the heart. You take away a lot of the lifeblood of that traffic moving through. And so it's a tough balance to reach. It can be reached. I know we've done it in other communities in Vermont. But it's something that has to be addressed very carefully so that you don't inadvertently take away it's just finding that balance of keeping the traffic you want and redirecting the traffic you don't.
Right. No, you're right. And one good thing is we have land availability. We have large tracts of land for sale. And, it's really, it's a major redesign, but it's fundamental, I think, to where we want to end up.
Thank you. Thank you for raising that important question. Any other questions or clarifying thoughts for Cheryl before we move to another speaker? Okay, I just want to mention that I've got Cheryl, I've got Pat, Annette, Indra, Kashka. Kashka, I'm putting you at the end because you have other times that you can speak to our group. So if you're here to speak, please put your name in the chat so I can make sure to add you to the list. Pat, can we hear from you next?
Yes, ma'am. Hi. Hello, everyone. I am speaking as someone who's a chair of a planning commission and attended the rural community engagement session. And it's unclear to me if it makes sense to repeat the comments that were made there, or and also how what was contributed there gets shared with this committee in terms of your contributions to the final plan. So if you can answer me that, then I can make a few comments or not. But
Marion, did you have a thought?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for being here, Pat. So the rural communities, for folks that weren't aware, there was a rural communities stakeholder event focused primarily on the issue and question around capacity that rural communities have to design and implement climate programs and initiatives. That was put on and organized primarily by the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, because that subcommittee is really focused on a lot of the recommendations that will be built into the climate action plan surrounding resilience and adaptation for rural communities. That summary of that event is posted online and was shared with that subcommittee. And to answer your question, Pat, about how that's being folded into the climate action plan, the subcommittee spent a significant amount of time reviewing those results and incorporating those into the actions that they're now working on prioritizing. We didn't share that as in an email with all of the subcommittees, but certainly could, as it's available and online and available for any folks to review. But I think sort of in answering your question, I think it would be beneficial to hear your comments here as well, as some of these folks were probably not on that particular meeting.
Okay, I can make it really quick. We are rewriting our bylaws. I live in a town of 500 people, and what we are having the climate change conversation as part of the bylaws, and that was one of the recommendations that I made, that there are a number of things that municipalities can do, particularly around zero discharge for new development. This is pretty established technology that exists for stormwater management, also around river corridor, conservation overlays, making sure that there is land to address food security issues, because that's what we're seeing. Thousands of acres didn't get planted in California. 40% of the food consumed in this country comes from California. And we saw what happened with COVID, that people immediately went to that, and there are waiting lists for plots to grow food. And in terms of both emissions reduction, people growing more food, and food security, communities being able to identify land that can be available for folks, that it's not a hoof, it's not a long way that you have to go. And that a lot of the weather related issues that we've been told to prepare for, that the watershed level is really a place to do that work. And some of that happened with updating the FEMA plan several years ago. And the other place where some work can be done is using the current use model in terms of the paying landowners to manage their land in a certain way, and that in fact might be easier than counting emissions reduction, that there are so many other issues around flooding, wildlife being able to move, and people are familiar with the current use model. So those were sort of the heart of the comments that I made, and particular to the Just Transitions Committee, I had a question or a request, and that whatever contribution that Just Transitions is going to be making to the final climate action plan, to reference the UN's recommendation that came out maybe 3 months ago, and that is that spending on climate change should be no more than 50% on emissions reduction, and it should be 50% on adaptation, because it is the most vulnerable who are going to have the biggest impact from the adaptation piece. And at least, maybe it will get ignored, but of all the committees that will be contributing to that report, this one seems the one maybe most able to make a statement about that. So I guess you could take that as a request. And then a question that I had was also for the Just Transitions, that my understanding is that you're collecting engagement information to inform your contribution. And it would be nice to hear a little more about how that might look. You know, will it be a very structured way of going through comments that have been given other places and comparing them to the Just Transition principles? I just don't have a picture of it, and you may not have one now either, but it seems like something that needs to get woven in as inclusive a way as possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Those were really thoughtful contributions. I know you're giving this a lot of deep thought, and I heard a lot that helped me think about ideas. I will just answer or reflect upon your last point and then ask other members for questions or clarifications from Pat. You know, later today, we're going to talk about that very subject. I think right now we don't know what it looks like, and we're thinking about it. I want to make sure you and everyone else knows, though, that the scoring rubric that we developed with our guiding principles are now being utilized, and actually Kaya Morris, our former co-chair, is no longer with us because she has been hired to help work with the other subcommittees to help apply some of the lens of equity to the proposals. At this moment, the proposals are very high level, and I think the most immediate use will be in helping to prioritize some of the things that kind of rise to the top. I want to ask our subcommittee members, are there questions or points that you'd like to reflect back with Pat? Pat, I especially appreciated at the end, pointing out the UN resolution, which I don't have, so please send it to me. But I do think when it gets down to the point of how do we spend the money, how do we prioritize, I think we will be getting down to that tug of decision making, and so it'll be helpful. And you make a good point, that could be a place where we weigh in. All right, so the next person, unless I see any hands for a question, Annette.
Hello, thank you for holding this forum today. I will point out that I'm grateful for the sun because I live off grid with solar and it's been cloudy the last few days. And so what you'll see behind me is it's laundry day. And I waited until the sun came out until I could do laundry with my solar hot water, heated water. So I run Vermonters for a Clean Environment, which has been in existence since 1999, where we started by fighting $1 billion natural gas power plant and pipeline project that never got built, but was supported by then Governor Howard Dean. And in the last 20 years, we've worked on landfills, large farms, pits, quarries, energy projects, solar, wind, biomass, all over the state. And I did participate in your public forum fairly early on and asked to be included in your stakeholder group or being interviewed. And I was really disappointed that nobody has talked to me. I do have 20 years of experience in Vermont communities, and I now feel like I'm running a marginalized organization. So I'll just put it that plainly. I don't understand why we haven't been talked to. My other point that I wanted to bring to your attention is that I'm kind of confused about terminology. Marginalized communities. I mean, it's very clear to me the BIPOC folks are very extremely important, but in my work, I guess it's my own flaw that I just see people as people. And so I work with people regardless of who they are, where they're from, how much money they have, rich, poor. I've helped people climb their way out of mobile home parks that are disgusting. I mean, and they're white. So what I don't really understand is what your terminology means, and is the just transition about everybody who lives here, or is it limited to certain categories? I think since I'm confused, generally that means that other people don't know either. I don't know if you've developed a definition of the marginalized groups that you want to put in focus. And I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I discovered there's a new organization that was being promoted by Rights and Democracy, and it's called Vermont Renews. And one of their policy papers says frontline and vulnerable communities will help to identify the best locations for, in this case, it says these renewable energy projects, in order to ensure that we do not uproot marginalized communities or dispossess them of land. And I don't know what that means. I mean, I have seen multi-generational Vermonters treated absolutely horrendously by corporations in numerous areas of the state. For me, it really doesn't matter what people look like, and I don't want to say or do anything to minimize the issues that many people have. But I also think that, for instance, when we're looking at the demographics of the state, and in particular rural areas, that it is so easy for the people who are neighbors, that's really the best word I can identify. The group that I represent are generally neighbors, which then gets them called NIMBYs. Sierra Magazine just did a hit piece on us and titled it NIMBYs. It's absolutely outrageous thing that they published, full of errors. So us NIMBYs, who are the ones in the front lines protecting the environment, protecting the biodiversity, dealing with the floods and the stormwater runoff, and how do, I guess to put it just as plainly as possible, how do white people fit into this? And is this a conversation you've had? Have you defined who marginalized people are? So a couple of weeks ago, I organized a group of people to speak to the Natural Resources Board about what it's like living next to quarries and extraction industries. And this goes to your prior conversation about traffic. There is virtually no enforcement anymore. And the half a dozen people who spoke were from different parts of the state. And the main thing they came away from with was that everybody had the same story. And it was really sort of surprising and also depressing to hear that they were all living with a very poor quality of life because of dust. They couldn't breathe. I think, for the most part, these were a variety of locations, some in the rural countryside, some in a village. So I guess those are the kinds of sort of questions I have. To a certain extent, I mean, I was really happy to see what 350 Vermont's doing and the outreach, but I also don't want to see the Climate Council get accused of being kind of an echo chamber. And so there are all kinds of people, like in my town, they tried to open up almost all the roads to ATVs. And my guess is that the outreach is not getting to the people who love to drive ATVs all over the place, or hunters, or, I mean, I don't understand how the outreach is supposed to work in terms of getting to those people who are not already on board with what you're doing. And if I could have a conversation with someone to sort of brainstorm or come up with some ideas I might have, I'd be happy to do that. But I've made that offer before. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Annette, for joining us. And I don't know if you've read the document that, you're asking big questions, and we've done our best to try to define. We were called together by statute and are trying to define.
You're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Annette, for joining us. And I have a few thoughts, but I want to just ask if anybody had another question. Kashka?
Thank you so much. So Annette, I think that I hear what you're saying, and I understand it's hard to know whether or not, whose voices is being heard. And this is the work of the Just Transitions Committee and all of these other organizations that are attempting to hear the voices of so many different people from all over Vermont, whether they're BIPOC, from rural communities, from you. And I would love to hear, I would love to know in the chat or anywhere else how we could get in touch with you or your group, whether it's through email, through Zoom, whatever it may be, because that's our job. We have come up with these guiding principles to help hear the voices of those, not just BIPOC, but everyone who is typically not heard in the conversation. Their voices are shunned. There's so many louder voices in the room. So our job has been to make sure that your voice is out there, and that these guidelines, these laws, everything that comes forward has your voice in it, and has your struggle, and has what you're going through, because that's our job. That's what we need to do. We need to find out what everyone is going through in order to make this just and equitable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would just also add that, we have been wrestling as a subcommittee with definitions in something that literally was created by statute, a concept that is relatively new. So if you haven't already, I hope you will read, because we tried to define and answer some of the questions in our Just Transitions document. Great. And I think if Kashka wants to follow up with you, great. And in terms of outreach to other groups, I would hope Meredith or Marion could connect just to make sure we are reaching out. Obviously, we've heard from Mona, we've heard from rural places. We can't reach everywhere. And of course, we have a very short timeline, but we are trying and we're still trying. Thank you. Okay.
You're on mute again, Sue.
Did you just hear anything I just said? No.
It just jumps off right at the end. So we heard most things, but
Okay.
seems to be
Well,
muting you after about 30 seconds.
I better stop talking. Okay, so next I have Indra, and I do want to say, as I mentioned earlier, the community action agencies have actually hired both Indra and Kashka to work with sort of the network of low-income service providers that we represent and partner with. So thanks, Indra.
Thank you. So before I make a comment in that capacity, I just want to say something based on what I heard, and I can't bypass it. Just because certain communities are now prioritized does not mean other communities are left out. So when we are advocating for our voices, I really do hope that we don't feel like we are competing. That's just the comment that I want to make for all of us to think, and that I'm commenting as a regular Vermonter, BIPOC Vermonter, low-income Vermonter, privileged Vermonter, however you want to define it. I just want us to think from that perspective, and I just could not talk about other things without saying that. Anyway, so as Sue mentioned, I have been working with the CAP agencies to really listen to the voices of low and moderate income Vermonters, whose voices are often not at the table. And how do we know that? I just want you to quickly imagine when you're entering a conversation about climate change, a lot of things that are presented to you seem very hard to understand. This is the first time you have read the information, a lot of pages, you're asked for the comment, but it is really hard to digest all of the information, and you didn't know all of these initiatives were happening. How does that make you feel? But when you reflect, you realize that the climate change does impact you. Maybe not at a level that everybody's thinking about. Your garden is getting dry. You know the impact of the drought. Oh, the loss of maple income. You see it happening. Less amount of tourists coming to Vermont. Loss of waves. It impacts you. High heat and humidity. You see the toxic mold building in your house. You see the impact. Oh, there are more eagles now. I'd never noticed that. How does that relate? Oh, there is a bear in the town, which you hadn't seen before. It does relate back to the climate change. Brooks running dry, cabins hard to access, losing trees and wildlife. And after all, we are Vermonters. We care about the cost of woods and water. It's going up. It impacts you. When you hear the information that way, it becomes easier for you to see that the change of climate globally does impact you every second of your life. But you haven't heard that information before. It was never discussed that way. And when you're asked the question that way, it becomes much easier. So when you ask us what we are doing, we're asking these basic questions, asking people, how has it impacted you? At first, folks who have attended those forums can tell us there's a blank stare and silence, because climate change is this big issue that only educated people who are well-versed can talk about it. But when you bring it down to simpler level and start interacting how that affects you, how does it relate to one another, it becomes easier to see the impact. And nobody, regardless of what political form you come in, where do you live, you don't want this world to be damaged. You want it to be preserved and protected. That's the voices that we are hearing among low and moderate income Vermonters in our one-on-one conversation, small group discussions, and starting today, small tabling out in the communities. So in terms of thinking about, how we should be prioritizing and what we should be prioritizing, a lot of jobs you hear, they're becoming virtual, but the job that you do, they're in person. Where is the investment to really help people get the jobs just so that they could be doing the work from their home, just so that they're not producing a lot of carbon emission from driving to another town? Oh, when it comes to driving, you hear other countries are doing really well with building trains, even through the mountains. Public transportation is accessible. That is very difficult in Vermont. That's what you hear. But where is the discussion about building public transportation, making it accessible for people? It's not that we want to pollute the climate. It's simply that we have to drive to our job. That's what we hear. When it comes to getting the feedback from people, where is the communication about progress and where is this input going? Those are the questions that we hear. So can the committee, the Climate Council, build a mechanism just so that they can communicate about where the comments are going and where how the progress is being measured? And even when it comes to thinking about all the policies, the basis that we are hearing from a lot of people from low and moderate income folks is, can you keep the cost in mind and its impact among those who have the least when designing any policy solution? Because we could be talking about driving electrical vehicles, but they're not cheap. And tomorrow, nobody wants to be labeled as not caring for the environment because, again, that mold in your house, that drought in your garden, the dry brooks, they impact you. They don't want to be left out. They don't want to be left behind. But if the policies are coming at a cost, when you're really struggling, raising 2 of your kids as a single mother, working 2 jobs, how are you going to pay for all of those? It impacts me. However, it is costly. That's what we hear. So the request for the policy people, as you're designing any of the climate action plan, one of the questions that, that I am hearing, that we are hearing from the people for you to ask in the beginning is, how does this impact people with the least means? And what can the state do in order to support? Because at the end of the day, it is very clear that the research has shown that people with low income, people who are from racialized, marginalized background are the most impacted. If we want to define marginalized, there is the federal report that has defined who is impacted the most already. And if these people are impacted the most, their concerns should be left at the front and center, because these people are the most impacted, and any of the policy changes, if their needs are not addressed, they're not going to help them be accessible to those people. Having said that, we are organizing different public forums, and at the end, you probably can see, I even put the display, we are also writing from the chart paper, people are writing there, and we have the Jamboard and everything, PowerPoint. Folks who know, we'll be submitting all of those in the form of memo. So think of it more as supplementing the work rather than competing with anything. So, and if you know anybody that is interested to be a part of this, would like to help, we welcome any and all kinds of help. And to make it be accessible, please call out one another or call in. That might be the effective way, because even when we are trying to do the right work and try to be accessible, if those voices are not at the table, it becomes really difficult. Because like I said, in the beginning, we said we are going to do in-person event. We had one in the Northeast Kingdom. We have virtual forums, but slowly we realized even saying we'll do it over the Zoom, what percent of the people actually have it? What percent of Vermont actually has internet access? And slowly we had to quickly, realize that maybe tabling is the best form of reaching out to people and collecting their information. So being very open to those ideas might be a good thing for all of us to do. And, at the end, that might be the best way for us to reach out to people. So the bottom line, I'll repeat again, in designing any of the policy solution addressing climate change, please keep in mind the cost and the impact of any of the policy solutions you're proposing in the lives of those who have the least, because they are impacted the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Indra. Any questions or follow-ups for Indra? Kashka, your hand is up and I don't know if it's up again or still up.
That's a good question, actually. No, I was going to follow Indra, but no, if anyone has questions, please go ahead.
Well, why don't you go, Kashka?
Well, Indra, okay, thank you so much, Sue. And thank you so much, Indra. I think that it's so interesting because, so I came on board really not knowing much except for, you know, what impacted me and our communities. But the fact is that what we're trying to do here is draft something with this in mind, that there's so many of us that are impacted that simply don't have the time nor the opportunity to have a voice. So that's what we're doing here. And I'm so grateful to Indra. I'm so grateful to Capstone and all the other communities and organizations that have tried to have their voices heard so that we can come up with an action plan, because it's completely doable. It's doable. An action plan that the legislature can take and come up with a plan that will help most, if not all, people and help the environment at the same time. We can do this. Like, I know we can do this. But I think it's important to hear all sides and to have them front and center at the table. So I am just really grateful that everybody's here, and thank you, Indra, for sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kashka. So is there anyone else sort of from the public who wanted to share some input? This is the time. And I'm not seeing hands. I see Chris Campany. Why don't you go? And then again, when Chris is done, please step forward and just speak up if you have more comments to bring. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, some of this will segue into the 5:30 discussion about just transitions and equity considerations and implementation. But a concern I have, and it's more of a feeling, I am a little concerned that now that we're beginning to actually have the policy discussions, we're beginning to identify the really start getting into the pathways and the strategies and the actions. I'm a little concerned that just transitions principles may be getting, yes, I'm a little concerned that along with everything else we're supposed to be taking into consideration, that the typical thing that happens with just transitions type policies are, we got to do all this stuff. We got to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, adaptation resilience, all of these things. And then we got to think about just transitions, almost like it's an option, not a primary directive. And I would just argue that's going to be one of the primary tasks of this subcommittee going forward, is holding the council to account to the principles that it's adopted, and not making them optional or marginalized. I'm not saying that is going to happen. I'm just thinking it's just, honestly, it's a tendency that happens in a lot of policy processes where things like this, where these things that try to level the playing field and try to address fairness, justice, and equity, because they're hard, they tend to get pushed to the side and are not necessarily an afterthought, but viewed something that's kind of being optional. The other thing too, just responding to Annette, I understand where you're coming from, Annette. I'll just say, in my experience as one of the most privileged creatures on earth, which is a white Protestant heterosexual male, when it's been my observation, obviously I've not directly experienced it or felt it as a person of color or a woman or somebody else who identifies different than their has an LGBTQ gender identification. What I find is absolutely there are white marginalized people in white marginalized communities, but man, as soon as you layer in sex or gender identification, BIPOC, the recognition of that community as having needs or being particularly marginalized further. I mean, that tends to get lost. And, you know, from what I don't see, you know, historically, people who are not white male, and again, as we go down the, you know, don't get the same attention and respect, and their concerns addressed in the same way as frankly as whites do. And that's regardless of what state or probably even what country you're in. And so that's why I think, you know, I think that we need to be mindful of that, and need to look out for all of our neighbors, because you know, I see it all the time. Work like hell not to do it myself, and but see all the time people who are not white, not male. You know, once you start look at different genders or ethnicities or colors, absolutely getting marginalized and not given the same rights to participate in processes, and not given the same tools for even for equal outcomes. So I'll hush up, but anyway, that's just my perspective.
Thank you. All right. So is there anyone else who had something to share? I didn't know if anyone from 350.org was here. I know they were sort of asking for an additional opportunity. I know they did speak at the last Climate Council meeting, so maybe that fulfilled their aspiration. But I did want to give the floor to them if they're here. I see Beverly raising her hand. Yes, Beverly.
Well, I'm on the 350 board, and I expected that there would be someone here to talk about what they've been doing. You know, they have been holding public speak out so that people can talk about, you know, what they're needing. And being a board member, I haven't been privy to all of that, but I do know that 350 has been doing a tremendous amount of work. And because they are such a grassroots organization, they are able to get into the community and talk to the people that might otherwise just ignore a survey or a questionnaire as to what, you know, what they think about climate change and how it's impacting them. So I know that they've been doing a lot of work, and I'm really sorry that there's no one here to bring us up to speed on that. That's all. I just wanted to say that, because I was hoping someone would be here.
Thank you, but it's helpful to even hear from you, and thank you for being a member of their board. We definitely heard there was a lot of outreach. Marion, maybe you can share what we've heard from them and received from them. I think you were there in person when they were speaking at the Climate Council meeting.
Yeah, I was, and I'm happy to share the link to the recording of that as well, if folks would be interested in watching that, and I can point you to roughly where in the time frame it is. It's near the end. I could also run over to my desk and bring back the roughly 50 pounds of postcards that they brought with them and have left with us. And we're working on scanning and how to best share those with the council and the subcommittees. Those postcards were all signed, hand signed by folks organized through 350 with sort of the main principles that they would like to see for a just transition in the climate action plan. So we really appreciated them coming out. There were about 10 of them that came in person to the last council meeting, or excuse me, 2 council meetings ago, and provided comment. And I will say they did, I'm forgetting the name of the woman who said they were going to send us comments, detailed written comments from some of the outreach that they had done in person. I haven't seen those yet, but perhaps could follow up with you, Beverly, about the best way to get those to us to incorporate them into public comment. So just wanted to share that. I'm happy to go grab the postcards if you all wanted to see them on here, but it's a big, big stack of them that we have here in the office.
Yeah, they did. They have been really, really aggressively pushing postcards and talking to people and getting people to sign on. You know, the communities that are most impacted are concerned, and that's one way they can easily show that they're concerned by signing, signing a postcard and not even having to put it in the mail. So, that's as much as I know at this point. I'm a very new board member and just now getting on board with everything that's going on there. So.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will say that the members of the Climate Council, and I'm included in that, have definitely heard very moving testimony. I think that it's in the chat, and I think as Kelly mentioned in the chat, it's really worth looking at if you have the chance. And certainly it will be in what we all digest. And I think that the mound of cards, Chris Campany, maybe helps us not allow the concerns to be disregarded, to your last point. All right. Well, it is almost 5:15, and that was the time we allotted. Is there anyone else who would like to share before we move on in our agenda?
I just want to say that I think it's really, really important, and I've said this to members of 350 also, that the Just Transitions Subcommittee work closely with these grassroots organizations, because that is going to be our end to the communities that generally don't have voices that are heard. And I'm really glad that we're having this, this meeting, and that people are sort of chiming in and giving the reports as to what they're doing. Every time I pick up a paper now, I'm seeing something about, just transitions. And I think that's really, really important and very valuable to the work that we're doing. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I see you, Amanda. I'll just make the point that I think it is new, and it is true that the equity lens is now a part of public discourse. And we don't know exactly where it goes from here, but we certainly can be a part of carving the way. Amanda, did you have something?
Yeah, just I guess a question for Mary, and maybe it'd be better for Jane, as we're talking about public comment. I've been kind of following the public comments as on the Climate Council website over the course of the year. And I'm just wondering how those are being communicated or incorporated, because Annette, I have noticed that you've commented a lot over the course of the years. And then I guess thinking about all the public engagement forums that have happened, like how does the council foresee that being incorporated?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that and appreciate the question, as it's something Jane and I have been talking about a lot recently. So I think if you all have taken a look at the public comment board, you'll see there are a lot of comments in there. I think we're up to roughly 360 comments or so since the public comment portal was open. Obviously that comment portal is public, and we have, especially where there have been comments of a lot of substance as it relates to particular work of the subcommittees, have been sharing those with the subcommittees directly, or the subcommittee co-chairs. But do acknowledge that it's a lot of work to take those public comments and synthesize them and actually filter them into the subcommittees and into the work of the plan. We just this week have luckily been brought in some additional capacity through the form of an AmeriCorps with Vermont DEC, who's going to help synthesize all of the public comments, particularly focusing on this time frame of really the summer into the early fall, where we've been really aggressive in trying to seek public comment, synthesizing that into the broad buckets that align with the public information that the Climate Access and RISE was sharing at the public engagement events. So they've sort of broken the actions down that are being proposed into a couple of buckets. And we're going to take those public comments and and synthesize it into buckets there, and then share that both with the subcommittees and with Climate Access and RISE to incorporate into their public information that will be shared back with the full council. So we are working on synthesizing that, taking all of the comment from the public comment board and pulling that into the work for the subcommittees and for the climate action plan. And we also are acknowledging that we do need to think a bit with the steering committee and the council as a whole about how we continue to use that public comment moving forward, acknowledging that it's really important to gather that public comment, but there's going to be a point where we're not going to be able to, we just don't have enough time to both take that public comment and put it in as we're writing in the plan, especially in the month of November leading up to December 1st. So I think that's something that the council will have to talk about as we think about public engagement and the use of the public comment board moving forward. But we will be taking all of the comments that exist now and synthesizing those and sending them and sharing them with the subcommittees to incorporate into their actions and recommendations for the CAP.
Thank you. Thank you for that work. It is a lot.
You know, I want to also just point out that while we are very hard at work, the Climate Council developing, and especially Marion and Jane and others, developing the climate action plan, this is the first iteration of a plan in December. And sort of the public process does not end there. In certain ways, you could even think it begins there, because then there will be real ideas digested into a readable format with probably some prioritization around them, which then will have a more formalized public response opportunity. As I understand it, Marion, please correct me. There will also be activities that the legislature might take up that are more urgent in nature in terms of meeting some of the earliest emission targets. So all of the work we are doing now, trying to access more voices and educate and bring them into this conversation, it isn't just a one-off. This is really just the beginning of a process, because even when something gets approved, then there will be another whole process, as Chris has pointed out many times, rulemaking, local zoning, all kinds of ways to be a part of a process. So every time we're educating, it's not just for the one time that, you know, public climate access has an online event. It's for helping people become more familiar, not only with the issues, but the process as it goes forward. So I just want to remind us of that. And I thank everyone who shared today for their comments, and we'll continue to keep open doors and minds and hearts to your ideas. And these ideas shared today are also going to be part of those public comments that I think are being synthesized by Marion and her team. Okay, I do want to move us forward in the agenda to just talk about the legislative hearing, which we have been invited as a subcommittee to attend and speak before a committee. I think it's the House Committee on its technology.
Energy and technology, I believe.
Energy and technology. Yeah, that committee changed names and I lost track. Thank you. So Representative Briglin is the chair and he's reached out. So the date is the 22nd of October at 1 o'clock. That's a Friday afternoon. I would really like us to think about what the message is that we want to sort of present and who really wants to and has time to present. You know, I'll start out by saying, in my mind, it's like we want to talk about our guiding principles, which we've worked really hard on. And, you know, I, among others, have had to present these in various forums. But personally, I hope that our voices from various communities might really show up to share why this work is important and really convey the importance of many of the issues we've been raising here. So I want to ask, could folks who are interested and available raise their hand so we can have a sense of it? Beverly, I see your hand. Oh, phew. I'm hoping maybe Beverly, I don't, Virginia isn't here, but she has spoken. Mona, I know you have a lot of thought and interest. I'm also wondering about you, Danielle. We really haven't spoken a lot to labor issues. And I know you have so much to share. Any chance we can interest you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm driving. So I wasn't raising my hand, but yes, I'm hoping either myself or another labor representative will be there. I just will be working, so I'm trying to figure that out.
Great. I think there might be words in the chat that I'm not catching. I'm available. That's Iris is available, but doesn't have a lot of time. So, but we'll have a youth voice. Good. Well, it doesn't have to take prep time, Iris. You are such a strong voice, but I know that we can also kind of get together to help prep a little more as long as I know who's interested. So I have Beverly, I have Danielle, I have Iris. Mona, is that anything you'd be interested in?
I'm just getting my third dose of vaccine today.
Oh my goodness. That's great news. Good for you.
Yeah, but I am, we just, whatever you assign me, I will do it. You see what I'm gonna be beneficial. I will do whatever you ask me to do.
Okay. And what about you, Kashka?
I'm in.
Okay. All right. I just heard at least 5 people. I'm going to put an email out after this just to make sure that whether there's anyone else who wants to participate. But I think if we can get those voices out and we can really think about the different points we'd like to make, so not to feel intimidated, but we'll talk about it. I think it would be great. And I think we'll have maybe an hour of time. So you can kind of be reflecting on, what it is that you are interested in. Sarah, I see a thumbs up. Does that mean you're going to do the presentation, Sarah? We can't hear you, sorry.
Hey, Sue.
They
When I
don't
said,
want to hear from you. They want to hear from you all. So the thumbs up was thank you to everyone who's willing to step up and provide testimony.
That's great. Yeah, Chris, and I know, Chris, you testified previously, and I'd love for you to set the context for everyone why you think they want to hear from us. Thank you.
yeah, so I was asked specifically because I served on this subcommittee about it by the Chairman Briglin and the other members of that committee. But Chairman Briglin, he's interested in this. You should absolutely plan on speaking about how the principles were developed, the process, I would suggest, and then how they're to be applied within the council. He was aware of the rubric and was interested in how that's going to be applied. But I think it's also important to note that at least from his perspective, I don't imagine other members of that committee too, and other members of the legislature, they're interested also in how they're looking at this as ultimately being applicable beyond just climate policy, but policy more broadly for the state of Vermont. So I don't think he spent a lot of time thinking about that, but just I would definitely be prepared for a question about that. Because I do think just frankly the existence, the work that went into creating those it is. I don't think this is too grand a term. I think it's more revolutionary than you probably realize it is. If you participate in policy on a regular basis, these kinds of principles, calling them out and then hopefully being able to achieve them, that's a pretty major change in policy approach. So this is frankly a really big deal.
Thank you, Chris. And I saw, Sarah, your point in the chat, and it was exactly the point I was going to raise. Would it be appropriate in folks' minds to also invite Kaya? Obviously, she's been a huge leader with us, and I think personally that the fact that she is now working essentially on our behalf to do the second part, which is how do we apply it, to me, she might be it might be very appropriate to have her, but I wanted to see whether people had any concerns or thoughts about that. Okay, thumbs up. Great. I'll get in touch with Kaya as well. And I think we're going to have a great hearing. Thank you, Chris. That's very, very helpful. And, you know, we're in this little bubble, right? But I think you're making a really good point. I think we're doing something really new. And, you know, the legislature kind of set us on this path, and we're carving a very new path. And I'm really excited to be able to share with them, for you all to be able to share with them. Kashka, your hand is up. Again, I'm not sure if your hand is newly up or you're still up.
Newly up. Okay, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Chris said and say that I think this is just the beginning. This is huge. I mean, everyone has worked so hard on the principles, on you know, making sure that everybody is heard, and I think this is just the beginning. So this is very, very important work, and I am thrilled to be on board.
And we love your enthusiasm, Kashka. Yay. All right. I think we don't have to get more time on the legislative hearing unless anyone has questions or key points they want to make. I will take responsibility for reaching out to the folks who said they're willing to help and to trying to help frame it up and including with Kaya. So you'll probably hear from me, and we'll have probably another meeting before the 22nd. And I'm planning to be there just to literally kind of kick it off, hopefully. That's my thinking. All right. So I'm so excited because we're pretty much on time so far. It's 5:30, and we are now thinking about turning our attention to the future and our role. And you know, we've done a lot. We've gotten to know one another, step one, and I think build more trust with one another. I think we've grown our subcommittee to involve more voices, or we've tried to. Thank you for hanging in with all of this. But I think the document that we put together is quite substantive, and we're going to have a chance to present it. Now we've really kicked into place, you know, with Kaya actually working to kind of use the rubric and the principles with the other subcommittees. You know, we're helping to move that. We've helped work with Meredith and her team to sort of oversee to some degree the public engagement. We've created more opportunities for engagement. So now we need to turn to what role do we play and what is our part and message in the climate action plan itself. I think you know this, but I wanted to reaffirm that I worked with staff to develop a synthesis of our document, which is kind of at the very front end. I think it got shared, Sarah. I think it got shared. I hope so. We will share it. It's all a draft.
I don't know, but I will send out the version that was submitted. I will do that as a follow-up. Yes.
Sue, are you referencing the version that will be included in the CAP?
Yes, that draft.
Yep, it's online. I can put it in the chat for folks to look at.
Okay, perfect. So that was an attempt to like put our meaty document into something very a summary. And I will just admit that it was hard to convey the soul of what I feel when I read our full document. But you know, that's just a summary. So the question is, the questions we have for you is, what do we imagine the future role? What is the ongoing role of the rubric? How does it connect to strategies? How do we see the guiding principles valued and used by others in the future? How we will continue to have impact, and how will the principles, assessment questions, and rubric change over time? My question is, Sarah, are we asking those questions to be what we want to digest for what we want to be written in the plan?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. So I think that's right. So there is the next section of the plan that we are, our committee needs to contribute is called Just Transitions and Equity Considerations in Implementation. Right, so that's the next section that we have to write. So that's the next conversation that we need to have together. And so when Sue and I met last week with David and Jane and staff, we were trying to think about, like, how do we get our juices flowing in this conversation? Like, what do we mean in implementation? And so these were some of the questions that came up for us. Oh, we should think about what's the future role of our subcommittee once the plan is drafted and out, or once the plan's out, right? What's the role of the rubric after the initial recommendations come out? How does it connect to, future work after December? How do we see the guiding principles? So these questions are sort of helping us think beyond December 1st, right? Everything up till now has gotten us to December 1st, and we're going to have to write a little section that's like, what happens after December 1st, which with relations to just transitions and equity. That's the hope that we have tonight, is that we start to have that conversation. Just to tee it up a little bit, to say we have this meeting, and then we will have 2 more meetings before we have to submit that section of the plan, right? So tonight, I think our hope was to just have a general conversation where we can capture a lot of thoughts and ideas to kind of get our juices flowing. What does this section look like? What could we include? And then next week, maybe not next week, 2 weeks, we'll sort of take it a step further, and we'll have to, and then we'll have to bring back a draft potentially of like what might be included, and then, and then work on revisions together. So that's kind of, I think, where we're going, is we have a little bit more work to do in terms of drafting together.
Thank you. Sarah and I tried to meet, and then I forget between whenever it was we last met and now what we were doing. So I guess I want to throw it open to any and all thoughts about what comes next. I think we've touched on them. Frankly, Chris, you just mentioned that be ready for the legislature to ask what's next, and maybe part of it is that we hope these guiding principles have a life beyond the Climate Council. What other ideas do people have?
Wait, did I raise my hand?
Go for it. Go ahead, Kashka.
Okay, so I think that what I have noticed so much so is that oftentimes what ends up happening is that decisions are being made for people that do not have their voices in the conversation, and they're up to a certain point. However, what ends up happening is that not being able to have a clear lens of living in a certain part of Vermont, and obviously I'm just talking about Vermont, but in a different cultural aspect of Vermont, with so many different barriers, having decisions be made without having that lens and having that conversation or having those voices, it always leaves things behind, because you cannot walk a mile in those shoes unless you really hear it from those people. So that rubric that we came up with, those principles that we came up with, should extend out to every part of legislation, and just to think about it, just to really hear it, because that's what it's about. It's about all of us. And that's just all I have to say. Thank you.
Well put. Kelly.
Yeah, so I was thinking about the first question of what is the future of this committee, and what can we be doing? And I keep coming back in my mind to wanting to turn this thing around. The rubric and the principles are great for a proposed policy. What can we be doing to get new ideas or learn more about what existing pain points there are that the people crafting the policy may not even have thought of. And that's part of the public engagement process. But again, I think there's more that we can be drawing out of, what is your experience, and asking people questions and maybe hearing more. And like some of this wonderful public input we've been getting, I think we can keep pulling that and weaving it in a way that is not saying, here's a policy, how is this impacting people? Is this going to have an undue burden on, already burdened communities? But rather saying, what are the burdens? How can we alleviate them in this climate action plan? So some of that is being woven in already, but as we keep thinking, we have time to keep moving and putting more things into our climate action plan, even after December. That's just something I see this committee being able to potentially digest some of the comments we're receiving and also solicit more feedback from the public and bringing that forward as, hey, you may not even have thought of this policy that we could use to help with this particular impact of climate change. So I hope that makes sense, but that's what I've been thinking about, is trying to like flip it to getting feedback, using that to inform policy rather than taking our policy ideas and trying to make sure that we're not putting undue burden on people.
Thank you. I just am checking. Amanda or someone is writing these down, capturing these, because I can't keep up. Beverly, I see you, and Sarah too. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Beverly.
I think that, it's great to be capturing how people are feeling impacted by, this climate crisis. But I think that it's also important that we hear their voices in terms of what solutions would best serve them. What suggestions do they have for, for how to address this? We're talking about electric cars, and we talked about how people, sometimes people can't even afford to keep their electricity on for lights. But have we talked about a community solar bank? Maybe something that, is there for the whole community. That's just off the top of my head, but I think that people should be given an opportunity to put forth what they see as doable and impacted solutions to, to some of the things that we're asking the climate committee to consider. It's one thing to consider these things. It's another thing to start putting into practice something that's going to be tangible to making a change.
Thank you. It's so much, it's such an interesting point, because so many times we're thinking about big picture, and often when it really hits the ground of being pragmatically implemented, there's a real disconnect. So I think we can help be a connection. Iris, I wonder if you could share your thought. I saw you wrote something in the chat and I wasn't able to follow it. Is there anything you wanted to mention? Iris, I don't know if you're trying to join us. We can't hear you. Did you have something? I'm sure it's captured in the chat if you can't join us. There you are. Iris, I'm so sorry we're not hearing you. But I know you have something in the chat.
Yeah, Iris did, and maybe I'll just read it, because I also just, when we put substantial things in the chat, it's nice to say them out loud so that it's truly accessible for everyone. So I think Iris was raising up the thought that the principles be used in be adopted by specifically the Agency of Natural Resources, although I could see them being adopted by other parts of state government, because even though they're intended to be used in the implementation of pieces, recommendations specifically in the CAP, they have the opportunity to have impact on projects that exist but aren't necessarily in the CAP. So I think that was something she was raising that I think is I've captured in some notes I'm trying to take. And then also say that her other comment, which is having technical difficulties, we've all had, I had earlier tonight, is to say that we should consider having other committees discuss recommendations about extending producer responsibility in education and workforce development a lot more than they have to this point. So sort of coming back, I think, to the pieces around, again, implementation, right? Not just setting policy, because at December 1st, we'll have some, have a plan, but then in terms of implementation, and I think that's if I think I'm hearing part of Kelly's feedback there, it's opportunities to hear from people's experience during implementation as we start doing things. What are the opportunities for people to continue to give feedback to say, we need to do it differently, or that thing that was in the recommendation as it's getting implemented needs to shift a little bit. So I think, Iris, I'm not sure if I got your last statement, if I interpreted that right.
Sarah, if there's other things in the chat, I don't see them. They like come by in a bubble and then they're gone for some reason for me. If you can read, I saw Chris talking about budgets. Obviously, that's a huge one.
Yeah, just that budgets are the ultimate statement of policy. So maybe there's a role for, I don't know, Chris, if then you're saying there could be a role for our committee or for the principals to be used by committees or aspects of them, or the to be like the principles to be adopted by legislative committees or aspects of the rubric to be used in the legislative process. I don't know if that's where you're going, or if you're thinking more like our subcommittee could be. Not sure. You want to say more? I mean, I agree. Budget is policy, but.
No, if you think about it, I mean, where money is spent, oftentimes in government, is the ultimate execution of policy directives, right? And so all the work that you have to do ultimately to implement the climate action plan, it's not only the legislation and the rulemaking that follows, it's ultimately, it's the ways and means, the appropriations, it's the entire process. And that's why public engagement and developing, I've mentioned this before, I don't want to just keep hammering away at it, but too often when we talk about public engagement, it happens at the planning side of things, but it doesn't necessarily carry through to the implementation side of things. And to my mind, that could potentially be like the extended life of this subcommittee is making sure, showing up at hearings, not only about the policy deliberations, but, the appropriations hearings and budget hearings, and making sure that things are actually being executed. That's the point.
Thank you, Chris. Abby, I see you. I just want to make a quick comment based on what you just said, Chris. And also I'm reflecting back to a point that Pat made earlier that I wrote down. I agree that budgeting is where a lot of where the so-called rubber hits the road. I agree that we need to continue to do as much as we are now, if not more, to continue to educate and bring people into a process, particularly when budget decisions are being made. And I say that as a former legislator. But, we could think about pieces of policy or direction that we think should be a part of the plan. I don't know, but, Pat mentioned the tension between resilience, adaptation strategies and mitigation strategies. We saw early on, I believe it was New York, who actually had a minimum amount of investment, percentage of investment to be dedicated to, the frontline community. So there are ideas like that we could cogitate on. Sorry, Abby, for the interruption.
No, that's fine. I wanted to comment kind of on the same areas. So in state government, we have an equity impact assessment that we are supposed to use every time we submit a policy recommendation or put forth a budget proposal. So I just did like 6 of them in the last couple of weeks. And I think that equity impact assessment could be merged with our guiding principles and some of the rubric questions. And I think there's actually some improvement that we could offer to that assessment tool by a lot of the thinking that this subcommittee has gone through. And so, the equity impact assessment was developed by Susanna Davis as the racial equity director and was, I think, one of her early tasks when she came to Vermont into her current role. So I think there's a really valuable conversation that could have there about melding these 2 documents into something that kind of takes on some of the new thinking and new life that this subcommittee's done.
I think that's a great suggestion. I remember that rubric feeling like it had a very valuable and important focus on race, but that if it could be even add other elements, it could really be improved upon. And I love that what we're talking about is really how do we make sure this good work extends beyond this climate action plan. I like that. That's a really good suggestion. Anything else? Thanks for this good idea.
That's great, Abby. As a person who works in state government, whenever we can not just add on more, but integrate or change the way we're doing things, we have a tendency to just say, and also do this, as opposed to do that thing differently. So I think that's really helpful. Because actually state government is made up of humans who have like capacity issues and hours and days, and we can only do so many things. Iris, though, I'm sorry, I was jumping in to affirm that, but also to read Iris's comment in the chat that is, because her tech is not working. I feel you, Iris. That the process right now is that prioritization, that equity considerations are coming after the initial prioritization, which thank you for lifting that up, Iris. And so a role for our subcommittee, though, could be in the next couple months, could be to elevate the strategies and actions that need to be put in the plan because of their equity benefits, but otherwise may end up getting left out because of the way prioritization is happening. So I think that definitely could be true. I think also I would say, so I'm honestly strapped in time to do that, and then also just want to name that we got to think about like how that would happen, and I'm sure Iris, you have some thoughts on that, because I think we all recognize that kind of problem in the process we're trying to figure out. And then I would say, Iris, I wonder, and others, like, I think I just want to push us to say, like, after December 1st, what is our subcommittee doing? Like, specifically, what is our subcommittee doing after December? And so one thought I had, and I want to hear what others think about this, is that I know one of the biggest hooks on accountability is what we measure for results. And so we've talked a lot about how we sift through the ideas and ensure that what goes into the climate action plan has an equity lens, but we haven't talked about how we measure the work coming out of, like, when those things are implemented, how do we know that they're achieving their goals, right? How do we know that we're achieving the equity impacts that we desire with some of those? And so I wonder if that could be a part of our work as a subcommittee, or how that would fit into the Climate Council. So, like, are there metrics? Are there things that we would measure? I think hearing voices and feedback during implementation, but are there other specific things that we would say these need to be measured and we need to be holding ourselves accountable to achieving these specific things with relation to? I'm not sure what that would be like, so that would be, I'm just putting it out there. Could that be more pioneering work of our committee to think about what that would look like?
These are very good ideas. And I want to circle back to the issue Iris just raised about how do we have some input possibly on possible strategies that aren't rising to the surface, but have a particular equity benefit that we think. So I don't think we can come up with it right now, but I want us to put some thinking around that, especially staff who are kind of engaged in how the other committees are working right now, because I don't have that insight, and come back to that. You know, today is the 7th. Our next meeting is on the 21st. And the fact that and then the next day is the legislature, I want to just make sure people are still up. Thank you. I see you, Claire. Want to make sure people are still planning to be here on the 21st. And I feel like maybe we should devote a fair amount of our time to this topic so that we can actually get ourselves behind a few key themes that maybe between now and then we'll try to synthesize. Claire, did you have a comment, please?
Yeah, just a quick one about the metrics and related to your comment about staff who are involved in other subcommittees. I'm on the task group for in the Science and Data Subcommittee, I'm on the task group looking at the development of the monitoring and evaluation and assessment tool that is part of the scope of work of the technical consultant. Actually, we had a call about that work this morning, which is just getting kicked off. And one of the consultants from Cadmus did reference that in addition to the greenhouse gas and other sort of more technical components, there would likely need to be equity considerations that were built into that tool. So that's already being recognized in that work, although we didn't have a deep discussion about it. So it seems like it's a good time to be thinking about that. And Jane, or maybe Marion, would be able to speak more about that and the timeline for that. But just to flag that.
Thanks, Claire. We'll probably have to wait for Jane at the next meeting to speak closer to the timeline, as that's not a meeting that I was on, but I totally agree. And I think that's something we're looking to explore with the consultants is generally how do we expand that monitoring tracking tool beyond just the greenhouse gas mitigation requirements.
I would also suggest that Kaya may be learning a lot and have a lot of thought about this as she works through the effort that she's trying to do. So we may want to make sure we're getting lessons learned from her to reflect on this. All right. Well, I think we've probably, I really appreciate all the good thoughts here. I think we've got some real ideas. We'll synthesize more. We'll learn more about what Cadmus is doing on that one and bring it up and make sure we're on it. We'll try to circle back with Iris's idea and think what could we do, which would have to happen quickly, I believe. And we will move on to the part of our agenda, which is next, which is just checking in on other business. Are there members here who are attending other subcommittees that would like and have reports for us? Please speak up.
Chris said something in the chat about the last Climate Council meeting. There was some discussion about the principles, and I didn't know, Chris, maybe you want to just say a few things about that, because I know not everybody's on those meetings.
And I would invite Iris and Sue, I think you were there, other council members. The council definitely adopted the principles, adopted the rubric, but and I understand this. I'm not begrudging anybody, but there was also a lot of hesitancy and a lot of, yeah, we'll adopt these, but then would kind of say, but there are limitations about how they could be applied. And of course there are. I mean, there's limitations to how anything can be applied, but I just think it'd be helpful for folks to see. I think it's an indication of why we're going to need to kind of be vigilant and make sure that we speak up if we feel that the principles aren't being applied as intended. And again, I'm not disparaging anybody or making it, but it's a new, and it's again a fairly, maybe it shouldn't be radical, but it's a fairly radical approach and not a common approach to how policy is typically developed. And it's going to be a new thing for a lot of people who serve on the council, especially those who exist in kind of the policy realm. So if you watch it, it's not going to be any like aha. There's not going to be, there's no ahas or gotcha moments. You can see the reality of people wanting to support this, but also in their minds thinking about how do I do that? How do we change, go from business as usual to elevating these just principles to being a policy determinant, not just something that would be nice if it happened. And so that's why I would encourage you to do so. I don't know exactly how to go and find that section. And again, there's no villains here or anything like that. I just think it's worth, I think just thinking to see that kind of processing going on. So that was the reason for my suggestion.
Kelly, you've probably been at these meetings as well. Are there thoughts or reflections that you observe that you think would be good to share?
Specifically about the council meetings that we've had. Yeah, the biggest thing that I've heard from council meetings and being on most of the cross-sector mitigation meetings is people really wanting help apply these principles. So knowing that Kaya is going to be there doing that is really good. I'm very glad because it's a lot, and the folks who've been working really hard in cross-sector mitigation, I know that they've been doing that in the other committees as well. These task groups have been working really hard trying to come up with some really good ideas, looking at it from as many angles as they can, and having one extra set of eyes who can just really focus on that equity lens. And they're really happy to have that, and something that I think yeah, I agree. Like holding people accountable, but also people want to be held accountable. That was the biggest thing I heard, is everyone wants to be looking at this with an equity lens. They really, really want to do this work, but it's a big lift, and they're already juggling so many balls, trying to keep them all in the air. So that's the thing, is anyone on this committee, I think, who has some bandwidth, who can be aware of what's going on, and like jumping to other committees, cross-sector mitigation. Mostly a lot of what's been going on is developing these suggestions, and they're still in the suggestion phase, and then presenting them at the council meetings. So if any of you are interested in what's been put forward as currently what people are thinking, but nothing set in stone, check out some of those, either the meeting recordings, or there were some great PowerPoints put together to go through some of these suggestions to give. And then if you see any big red flags about equity issues, I think that's going to be really helpful. And my experience is that, yes, people are going to be receptive to, hey, you may not have thought of this, but this might be really important to consider in developing this policy. And so anyone who can just take it and look at it from an equity lens, I think that feedback will be welcome for any of the folks who are working on these policies.
Yeah, I can't wait to tell Bobby about it.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, really good perspective. The council is now meeting every week for 3 to 4 hours. So it's pretty intense right now, which is why I don't always remember everything. But it's good, and please join, and please, if you have concerns or thoughts, listen. It is 6 o'clock, and I know we have many parents with hungry children waiting. So I want to just honor our time. If there's anything that anyone wants to share before we close, speak now. I am just going to reflect something that I heard at an event today that I thought was so great. And I believe it is a quote of the Dalai Lama. So I'll end on this quote about gratitude is the open door to abundance. So there you go. Because we got a lot of stressors on us. So just being grateful for every breath makes everything more abundant. Have a great week. Have a great month. Stay tuned and stay safe. Wear your mask. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you.